Chairman Hoeven and Vice Chairman Udall, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs on this issue of human trafficking of American Indians and Native Alaskans. I also want to thank my husband, Senator John McCain, for his tireless work on the issues facing our Arizona tribes and the tribes throughout the United States. He made me say that. First, I must express my deepest appreciation to the members of the committee and the Government Accounting Office for examining the federal government's role in reporting, investigating, and prosecuting cases of trafficking involving Indian country. The issue does not often receive the attention that it deserves. I would also like to acknowledge Senator Heidi Heitkamp's efforts as an anti-trafficking ally. Senator Heitkamp has traveled to Arizona, where she and I met with one of our Native American service providers to discuss replicating this culturally sensitive care model in her state. Senator Heitkamp also graciously asked me to participate in an anti-trafficking roundtable in Bismarck, North Dakota, where we met with law enforcement officials and victim service providers working in the Bakken region. The remoteness of the Bakken region, the high unemployment rate of nearby Indian reservations, combined with the oil and gas boom, have created a hotbed of trafficking. Victims are mostly Native American women and girls transported to the region specifically for sex trafficking. Many of these victims are under the age of 18. Children being sold for sex, outward and organized crime of child abuse and rape. Because of their exotic beauty, Native American girls are also sold at a very high price on websites like Backpage.com. Backpage has been found to be complicit in writing the ads that vaguely attempt to disguise the sale of these precious children for sex. In other words, Backpage knowingly promotes the abuse of our beautiful Native American children along with other ethnicities. All too often, they are kidnapped, sold, and transported to remote places like Asia and even the Middle East. You may be asking yourself, what happens to these girls? Sadly, they're disposable. They disappear at the hands of these despicable traffickers. According to the International Labor Organization, human trafficking has enslaved an estimated 41 million people in the United States and around the world. Victims are used for forced labor, forced sex, and face daily physical, emotional, and sexual abuse at the hands of their pimps or strangers. In many cases, this form of child abuse is a product of organized crime. However, Native American girls and women are all too often trafficked by their own relatives, both on and off the reservation. Indian gaming and urbanized tribes have presented us with a new set of trafficking issues. I witnessed with my own eyes 6 little girls lined up against a wall inside a casino just outside of Phoenix, on display for customers. These children were silent and visibly scared. I contacted hotel security, and unsure what they should do, security personnel allowed the children to remain at the casino. I have found that Native Americans are largely overlooked as victims. One of the major impediments to prosecuting individuals and criminal organizations is the lack of victim services designed by and for Native victims. Traumatized victims are seldom willing to reveal their identities or testify against their captors. However, culturally sensitive victim assistance programs can and do empower women and children to breach the shadows of this horrific underworld. To that end, I would like to commend Chairman Hoeven for reintroducing the SURVIVE Act, a bill that would set aside $150 million from the federal government's $3 billion Crimes Victims Fund to improve victims assistance programs for Indian tribes. Another piece of bipartisan legislation that would help considerably to prevent trafficking is S. 1693, the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act of 2017, or SESTA. Last week, the Senate Commerce Committee held a hearing on SESTA, and the bill currently has 30 co-sponsors. I've been a long-time advocate of curtailing the ability of Backpage and similar websites to sell any human being online for sex. Over 75% of trafficking victims tell us they were sold online. We have found it easier to sell a child online for sex than it is to buy a bicycle or a sofa. It's high time that our courts stop enabling Backpage and others to hide behind the freedom of speech curtain while mothers find their children advertised for sex online and are powerless to stop it. The Communications Decency Act was not intended to allow websites to make millions of dollars off selling our children for sex. But we shouldn't stop there. I encourage Congress to consider assigning staff in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Health Service, and their sister agencies to train tribal leaders, elders, prosecutors, and law enforcement agents about the presence of human trafficking within their own communities. Create awareness in victim services unique to Native Americans. My own home state of Arizona is doing just that on every reservation within our borders. Finally, Congress must encourage tribal governments to criminalize human trafficking on their reservations rather than simply defer to federal prosecutors. I am proud to say that the Navajo Nation, the largest tribal government in the United States, recently adopted their first anti-trafficking laws. It's a start for the Navajo and should be followed by tougher tribal enforcement and cooperation with federal agencies. On a personal note, I was born and raised in Arizona. Throughout my life, I've had the opportunity to enjoy the beauty, the unique culture, the art, the storytelling, and the friendship of these glorious people. Their extraordinary culture is a part of the very fiber of my home state. Native American girls and women should be able to live their lives in safety without the fear of being subjected to this despicable and very dark crime of human trafficking. We owe that to them.
As Cindy McCain just said, reporting is a big problem. And that has to be people that can be trusted by the tribal members.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that to be an issue?
Yes, we do. And in the second report, when we did the survey, we ended up having lengthy conversations with the Minneapolis Police Department, and they talked with us about some of the activities that they'd undertaken to build better relationships with the community so that the community would indeed start coming forward to report instances of human trafficking. And so one of the things we talk about in that report is we try to speak to the need for building relationships between law enforcement and the communities, in addition to, of course, the service providers and the communities.
Have you found it to be connected to drug trafficking?
So during with the survey and in our conversations with major city law enforcement and tribal law enforcement, drug trafficking did come up, and oftentimes they told us that whenever they saw human trafficking, drugs were also involved.
Is that your finding, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, sir, it is. Almost all of our human trafficking cases have been surrounding drug trafficking and or prostitution rings.
Which is one of the tools for enslavement.
Correct.
Ms. Matthews?
We have also seen a large connection with drugs and sex trafficking, used also to get people into sex trafficking and also to keep them there and to maintain control over them. And also, you know, we have heard that pimps and traffickers, they can resell a woman several times where, you know, you have to keep repurchasing drugs. So it's much more lucrative for them to continue selling people's bodies. And so oftentimes you see them hand in hand.
Mr. Thompson, how serious is this problem for law enforcement just in general?
Sir, it's a very serious problem. We've got 30 drug agents in our Division of Drug Enforcement, and we've assigned those agents to do specific investigations related to narcotics and human trafficking, and that's all that they do. Because the substance abuse issues and the issues of human trafficking are on the rise for us. You asked the question earlier of some of the other witnesses. I can tell you that 4 or 5 years ago, I don't know that we had any human trafficking cases that we were investigating. We've had 14 in the last 3 years, and 2 of those were in the last week. And I can't tell you that that's necessarily the evidence of a raise, but it's certainly an indication to us that those resources that were committed there are not sufficient to keep up with what's there. We don't know exactly why there's a hesitancy to report. Obviously, there's a distrust of law enforcement in Indian communities oftentimes, but that's not the case just in Indian country. That's the case all across the United States.